Yeah, well, in the case of China, there was a large-scale national deception effort that they moved along for decades, influencing U.S. think tanks, influencing members of Congress, influencing the business community.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. Today, we're going to be talking about China's spy game and capabilities. And my guest today is Nicholas Eftimiades. Nicholas is a renowned expert on intelligence, espionage, and national security with over 30 years of service in the United States intelligence and defense communities. He served in senior roles across the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the U.S. Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service, where he specialized in technical and human intelligence, counterterrorism operations, and space policy. Let's dive in. Man, you have pretty hell of a resume in the intelligence, I'll call it umbrella. How did you get started? And I've talked with a bunch of, and I know quite a few guys who spent time specifically at the agency, and I always ask them, how did one get involved in this? And I'm still waiting. So just so you know, my lens is the movie The Recruit, which I'm sure you've seen. I consider this to be a documentary. So at some point in time, somebody circles some letters for you on a newspaper and they slide it across to you at a bar and you're recruited. It's a shadowy world of espionage and intelligence. And of course, now everybody I know from there is like, yeah, that completely didn't happen at all. So maybe today, though, is my lucky day. How did you get involved in the intelligence world?
Well, it didn't happen like that at all.
Do you know anybody who had happened like that?
Not in our government.
That is ruining my misconception of what I want it to be, because you probably would know, given the amount of time you spent in there.
I'll tell you what, it was deflating to me my first couple of years, because you figure out, you had the enter on duty, the EOD process, right? You enter on duty, you spend 4 days in the auditorium with a bunch of other people who, are like, now what does NATO mean again? Just things like that. And you're like, what? Just you kind of hone yourself for this career in international affairs and, blah, blah, blah. And I guess you realize that, they need clerks and everything else as well. And so it's just a diverse, line of people you get in there. But it's a bureaucracy like any place else. Far worse than smaller agencies. I've noticed you get a lot more things done a lot faster in smaller agencies. But, I out-processed for a trip once. And I used to do these swings 6-8 months at a time, going through Near East, South Asia, for example, right? A month and a half in India, a month in Nepal, that type of thing, doing different stuff in each. And I remember I out-processed with 17 different offices just to get out the door. So, I mean, and after leaving them, I actually came to find that that they were better than places like the Defense Department, like try and run an operation in DOD, and our people were trying to run it under the agency's auspices because the bureaucracy there was less, if you can imagine that, than dealing with big DOD. So, actually, my opinion, State Department Diplomatic Security was the best agency in the government that I saw work and that I worked for. And
interesting.
If I had one career mistake, it was leaving them.
The most common answer I get from people, specifically with the agency, so like, I just clicked on the website and submitted an email into the ether, and they got a hold of me a few months later. That is the most common recruitment story, if you will. It's very straightforward.
Yeah, I actually had to go back time and again because they kept losing my stuff. It took me 21 months. And, some personnel person at the end of 9 months, and you, patient, and you wait and you wait and you wait, and then call up, I haven't heard anything. Now, who are you again? And oh my God, we sent your file out to, I remember, to Taiwan. I said, why? And said, well, you're living, no, I went to school there. I haven't been there for a year. What the, and I mean, it literally took me 21 months and 8 days to get on board the agency just because they kept losing stuff and dropping the ball and making clerical errors and things like that. And then even then, I didn't get paid for the first month and a half. I mean, they, They literally had me go to a cashier internally and paid me in cash. I mean, there's no way you'd see that nowadays. And
Yeah.
hats off to them for being that flexible. They could do that. But what the hell, guys?
I,
How
I try
difficult
to
is it?
tell people, at my old job too, people think you spend time at JSOC and it's just running at full speed, absolute bleeding cutting edge of everything possible. And I try to tell people, like, I wish it was as exciting and speedy and as high speed as you think it is, but it was defined by its bureaucracy in many ways. And I've heard the same thing from almost everybody in every intelligence agency. They're like, God, I wish it was like the movies. But, like you said, yeah, I had to go to 17 different offices and paperwork. And yeah, I finally just gave up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was about it.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's
Well, for the listener and for the people watching, can you describe just kind of take us on a journey through your experience and career in the intelligence infrastructure writ large?
okay. Well, I actually decided, I think kind of young, I wanted to go into Intel, and that was the James Bond effect, not
Yep.
really knowing what it was like. Um, and I went to, and because I had grown up with martial arts, I guess I gravitated towards studying in Asia. So I studied, I did some college in Taiwan and 2 years, and did some time doing research subsequent to that in mainland China. So I got my degrees in East Asian studies. And so with that, from George Washington University, and after that went into CIA was my first assignment. In CIA, I was in what they call technical operations, which if you've seen the movie Argo,
Hmm.
right? Tony Mendez was my boss.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So, you get a good idea of what, I did for a living and it was an extraordinary amount of travel. I mean, I did over 100,000 miles a year on the road. So, that's okay for a while, but,
Yeah.
afterwards you start saying, okay, well, it's sort of like taking out the trash, every day there's more trash and you never feel like you're actually really, I don't know, you're not changing things, even though you're doing what you're supposed to do. So I went from there to diplomatic security service, which, as I say, is probably, if you want to be a special agent, tends to have some blend of sort of law enforcement and intel work. Um, so long as you have your eyes open and understanding, what that world is really like, I'll tell you it's the best job you can get in the U.S. government. I mean, it's just the phenomenal training, best training that I ever got in government. I went through 5 months
Hmm.
worth, and we shot 2 hours a day minimum, right? Just constant shooting. And they put a huge effort into their agents to train them. And my class was split up: a third straight out of college, a third out of the military, and a third law enforcement. So I was one of two Chinese speakers in the class, which the other one, of course, was Kevin Mallory, which subsequently arrested for espionage decades later. So, so
Whoops.
yeah, oops, exactly. But but nonetheless, it was a very high quality group of people. Was on their deployment team, what they called at the time security support team, to go out to high threat posts and stuff, and did counterintelligence work, including 6 months at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Uh,
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I haven't heard much about the diplomatic security service. I mean, obviously you can speak about it as broadly as you need to, but what's their charter? I mean, I would say most people have probably not heard of that agency.
Yeah, and they have it, and it's a really interesting charter. The Secret Service is responsible for protecting heads of state,
Yep.
foreign heads of state, as well as our own head of state. Everyone else that comes, a minister, senior officials, whatever, is the responsibility of diplomatic security. So the
Hmm.
protection responsibility is vast, including for U.S. embassies. Obviously, that's the primary U.S. embassies overseas. So, I mean, in a case like India, they're running a local guard force of over 500 people, which is a small army.
Yeah.
Responsible for the training and weapons, logistics support, and operations, and car movements and evacuation planning and evacuation routes, all that type of thing that they oversee and manage in an embassy. Counterintelligence, uh, primary for conducting U.S. law enforcement investigations overseas. So, even raids on foreign terrorists, DSA, not well publicized, but DS agents are often actually going through the door with, local services, Pakistan and other places.
Wow.
So, yeah, you wouldn't think it. It's not publicized, but
Yeah, you don't hear about it at all.
no, and they'll take a person in handcuffs and put them on a plane, maybe the DATS, plane or something like that, and then the next stop, they get off, the FBI gets on, and
Hmm.
and there come the cameras, the TV cameras coming in,
Yeah.
but the DS stays quietly in the background. But they do an extraordinary number of things, from threat protection to response situations to training foreign forces, to liaison with local police and law enforcement, conducting investigations overseas, and the protection for all U.S. Basically, diplomatic operations overseas everywhere.
Wow.
So pretty extensive portfolio. Uh, so anyway, last after that, several years in DS, I went to Defense Intelligence Agency, and that was largely, in the Foreign Service, it's a difficult lifestyle because if your spouse is working, someone's got to give up a career. And we were at that point, after 5 years, and well, someone was going to have to give it up. And she was making a lot more than me. So, but there is now, it's easier now than it was in my day. I'll say that, in the 80s, because, now there's remote work, which obviously we never had then. So, so Foreign Service, someone was always giving up a career in a lot of ways, like the military, right? If you're going to be moved around from base to
Yeah.
base, someone is likely going to give up a career. Um, so, long story made short, I moved on to Defense Intelligence Agency and spent the remainder of a 35-year career with DIA. And that went from operations. I did about 10 years overseas in Austria, London, and Tokyo. And that was just, that doesn't include the TDY or 6-month deployments or anything. That's just, being stationed overseas. And a fair amount of time on the analysis side too. So I was very lucky. I got to do both, which you don't typically get to do, because, if you're in analysis for 10 years, okay, you can't go into operations unless you start at the beginning.
Yeah.
And the same thing in operations, you can't, well, maybe I'll be an analyst. No, you won't, because you're competing with people who have been analysts, for a decade. So but I was very lucky that I got to move between both worlds and had, senior assignments and senior assignments in both.
Once you're vetted and established at a place like the CIA, if you want to, is it easy to move to these other government entities? Is it a more straightforward path?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
figured it
In
would be.
fact, because I get this question from students all the time, I retired in 2017 and became a full-time professor of Homeland Security at Penn State. So, of course, my students, are maybe have 10 years in the community. And, this is a finishing school for them, the master's degree program. But I do get a lot of questions on getting into and moving about in the intel community. Once you have a clearance, it's 100% easier.
Yeah.
Clearance becomes very, very marketable. But, and it depends on timing now. Timing is not great for people, even in the private sector, because of the government, scaling down.
Yeah,
Which,
we are in a, what would be the best description of what the time we're in right now? I guess you could pick your adjective. We'll just call it a rocky time, unsettling perhaps for those in the GS world.
yeah, for them, I'm going to go with right sizing in a way, because look,
I
we
have
just,
to agree. Even in the United States, the military, and that's really all I can speak of from experience. The amount of bureaucracy was exceptionally bloated. I understand how people can look at just cuts up front and say, "Oh my goodness, we are actually diminishing capacity." I'm here to, and I've been out of the game for 13 years of my time in the military, but I'm here to tell you right now, by removing some of like those 17 offices you had to check out with, like if you took
right,
5 of those away, guess what? Your job is actually easier. You can actually get more done.
right. I agree wholeheartedly. We've just, in many government agencies, settle into the mentality that this is the only way to do it. And if you take money away, if you take people away, you're diminishing the mission.
Yeah.
No, actually, not really. If you, it's a never evolve, never change circum. Look, we have AI now, right? I'm sure we can get 100 things done faster with AI than we did before when we were, doing it. And just as an example. So, and yet we still have the same mentality. Take a person away, take a slot away, and you're diminishing capability. No, you're really not. And
Yeah,
so I know that's tough for the bureaucracy to accept, but it is the case, and we need to do it. I mean, look, we explode, particularly after a 20-year war. I mean,
yeah,
20 years, people build up, intelligence capabilities build up, militaries build up to deal with that. Now it's over. So, or at least that major, commitment that we had is over. So, you can only expect a scale down. So that's going to be a little stressful in that world for a while. On the
I
other hand, we
agree.
have China picking up, right?
Oh,
We have,
and I was actually going to ladle right into that. You hear a lot about China. Probably the most common vernacular people are going to hear is in terms of a trade war, tariffs, this, that, or the other. Perhaps they'll hear Taiwan associated with that as well when it comes to microchips. And, I would say it varies on the person understanding the tensions between, mainland China, Taiwan, all of those things. Fortunately, I've
Mhm.
done enough episodes that I think I have at least a passing understanding of that relationship. But unpack for me, if you would, our relationship with China when it comes to an adversarial position. Because I've spent far less time in China, but I've actually had the chance to go over there. It was actually one trip, but we got to go see a bunch of different areas. It was from a manufacturing perspective. I was working with a brand that produced things in China, and it was cool, and the Chinese people, super awesome. Had some great conversations with them. So there's always this people versus the people in power, a
Of
separation of the
course.
two. So, so we can, I guess, let's take the people of China out of this. Let's talk about the CCP. Let's talk about what is often referred to as, our peer adversary. I'm curious your thoughts on it and where things stand between the two countries.
Well, we've had a debate in this country since the mid 1990s. I came out with my first book on Chinese intelligence in the mid 1990s, right? And that resulted in testifying before Congress 4 times and stuff, and a huge split and debate on how to proceed forward with China. And there were those who believed that, look, we're open, we help them as their economy grows, as they discover wealth. They're going to move towards democracy and move towards liberalization, including people like Newt Gingrich, who I briefed on this subject. They just were steadfast in that belief. And to me, it was, and having known China, I mean,
Mhm.
intimately, I mean, it's arrogance. It's an American arrogance. Inside every Chinaman is a freedom-loving American dying to get out. Well,
Where do they get that from? Like, to use Newt as an example that you brought up, did he have data that supported that opinion, or was
no,
that just the Western lenses? He just throws the American glasses on and sees everything through the optic that we
right.
are very fortunate to have.
A little of both. The only data that anyone had was a Harvard study. They used to constantly reference that as people worldwide received about a $13,000 a year income, that they started to push towards political pluralization.
Hmm.
That was the contention of Harvard in this study, and that was considered a worldwide, look at emerging economies. Uh, but I would say at the time, it's not China and it's not the CCP. So you have 5,000 years of history to look to understand these people and what they find important in life, right? Not so much politics, but their own economic wealth and gain, and and the CCP, we have decades of history. At that point, we had 60 years of history to look at to understand what it was like. Brutal authoritarian, absolute control, mind control over their own population if they could affect that. So it was easy to see how this was going to lay out for many of us on the China side, and for the rest, it was mirror lensing. They looked at it and saw Americans just waiting to be free, and they were wrong for decades, Republican and Democrat, really wrong. And it's led to a situation now of geopolitical tensions, with the CCP wanting what it wants, and America still wanting to be an open world, with an established legal structure that everyone sort of works within. China said publicly, that doesn't work for us. That's not the way we see the legal apparatus. The global norms are not friendly to China.
Ladies and gentlemen, hot salt from Firecracker Farm is the real deal. It's not just heat, it's flavor that elevates everything that you cook. The best thing to happen to food since fire. That's a bold statement, but I'm going to go ahead and agree with that. It's delightful. One of the best things about this brand is there's a real person behind it. His name is Alex, and he makes these in small batches, so it's not always easy to get. You don't want to miss out. All of the flavors are great. I have tried all of them. You really can't go wrong. Seriously, try it on everything. Steaks, vegetables, everything in between. I love cooking. I like cooking at home. I don't like putting sauces and overbearing things on the things that I cook, so I tried a little bit of the salt. And if I'm being honest, I tried a little bit too much the first time. It was a little spicy. So I had to back it off a little bit, and it made everything that I cook at home taste better. So it's an easy addition to the things that I already make. It tasted amazing. I was using the product for well over 6 months before Alex reached out to present as the sponsor for Change Agents. Easy peasy. I was already doing it. No additional time. A touch point with it in my personal life. I can talk about it from personal experience. Love what the brand stands for. Love what the brand was founded around. Enjoy the person who founded the brand. I mean, this is a match made in heaven. Get out of the comfort zone of what you can get in the grocery store. Go online to Firecracker Farm and use the code Ironclad for 15% off of your first order. You're going to be shocked at how much more of a flavor it brings out in what you cook. Sometimes to me, I don't understand. I have two good examples of this. For one, on topic of what you're talking about with China. Oftentimes, these entities will tell you exactly what they're thinking, what they want to do. I don't understand why we don't just take them at face value. The other example I have would be radical Islam. It's pretty clear what it is that they're looking for. And you can separate that from people of traditional beliefs of Islam. But I have never been more shocked by those that will sit there and listen clearly to what it is that they're lining out and then try to convince you that they're not actually saying what they mean, that they mean it to mean something else. And my theory is oftentimes people will just actually tell you exactly what they're thinking, what their motivations are, and what it is that they're trying to do. And if you listen, you kind of got it figured out a little bit.
Yeah, well, in the case of China, there was a large-scale national deception effort that they moved along for decades, influencing U.S. think tanks, influencing members of Congress, influencing the business community. So, and I'll give you an example of the most egregious, but kind of the most ridiculous means. I was in a member of Congress's office back in the 1990s and they asked me to stay and talking with this member after I'd had my time because they had a member coming in, not a member, a company official coming in from a company within their district who dealt with China. And, the belief was that were having some problems. So, Nick, would you stay here and maybe you can lend some guidance into the problem set? There weren't any problems. He just came in and said, hey, listen, I'm going to tell you what the Chinese told me that has to happen. Okay. MFN,
at least he was up front with it.
Yeah, and we thanked him for it. I mean, that was one of the ones that was up front. But and he said, MFN status has to pass. For my business to be profitable in China, MFN has to pass. That's the message that I'm not supposed to tell you, but I'm supposed to, lobby in support of MFN. So what you find that is multiply that by the thousands.
Yeah.
And China has used its wealth and its rising wealth. If you want to do business in China, you do what China tells you to, period. And
so where does that leave us today? How do you think China is reacting to, I forget the exact stat, but I think the last time I checked in on this, and it's been a few weeks, so this is probably going to be more, it's like 146 different trade or tariff changes from the current administration's position. And I know that there have been a variety because there's some in the news right now. Where do you think things stand right now between the U.S. and China?
Well, I think they'll work out a set of tariffs. They'll work out a set of conditions from which they can trade. I mean, in certain areas we have no choice. They're going to want semiconductors, and we want their minerals. Their strategic minerals that they can provide. So it's those two have to go forth and trade, and they basically will blackmail and say, look, you're not getting that and antibiotics. of which we're 90% of them, 90-something% come from China, or the precursor chemicals for it. So we're wholly dependent on them for that. And as long as we have a dependency on China for strategic minerals, for biotechnologies, et cetera, which they have risen dramatically in recent years, there's a limited amount that we can do in the area of restricting trade and trade conflict. So
do you see this stuff then as kind of theater, that just the back and forth, and we're going to do this and that, and we're going to put them into a vice? Is a lot of that just people being a blowhard?
No, I actually don't think so. I think that we're trying to manipulate and move it so that it suits the best possible chances for us. On the other hand, losing semiconductors, we know they're going into the military, into the Chinese military, and that presents a threat not only to Taiwan but to us in the South China Sea and to U.S. allies. So we're trapped. That's what they want. That's what they're willing to trade for, and we need those, strategic minerals and the biotechnologies that they're willing to provide, or the biochemicals are willing to provide. So, we're going to make this as best a situation as possible. What the U.S. should do, if it's smart, it's wean itself off its dependence to China. Start looking at alternative sources. Start building alternative economies. I went around Congress for a while pitching them to, hey, go take some of that $1 trillion investment fund that we have and offer companies something like, no cost loans or something to move their strategic, their businesses on strategic minerals and machining to friends, move it to Central America, for things that aren't going to be competitive in the United States.
Yeah.
Move it locally. You'll create hundreds of thousands of jobs, ease pressure on the border, build stability in those areas, and we'll have readily access with a very shortened supply chain, lower our dependence on China, which you see time after time, whether it's solar panels or any other types of technologies. You see China embeds backdoors in it. China's embedding capabilities to monitor U.S. Critical infrastructure through it. I mean, they do it blatantly. We catch it and say, and stop it. But it's very apparent it's a whole offensive, a wholly of society offensive that they have levied against the United States. And we're just not used to this type of warfare.
How long do you think it would actually take to measurably reduce that dependence? Because this is one of the things I think is lost on people. We're bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. We have to have a resurgence. And I know people in the manufacturing world, and they're like, yeah, that's a great idea if you give me 10 years. If it's like, sweet, you made a change on paper. Guess what? I don't have the equipment here to do what I would need to do. I don't have the people trained on it. And you're going to have to give me some time.
Yeah, I mean, we probably put over 50, 60 billion in just Apple alone in training Chinese nationals to be, quite literally. And, and you're, oh, they're so well trained. No kidding. Trained them. What the hell? So it's, and it's not just the U.S., but you're right. It's going to be a 10-year plus investment. And the problem is that Trump is a 4-year person. Yeah. So, and China is a very patient and willing to wait. So if things go, their way, great, they'll continue to progress. If they don't go their way, they're going to make other arrangements and they're just going to wait us out. Well, Trump won't be in there for that much longer. He's got about another 3.5 years, 3 of which are going to be productive. And every other minute, everyone will be wrapped up at the end with who's going to be next in line. So it just, he needs to, Congress needs to actually get engaged because things need to be put into law. And right now, while they have the ability to do, if there's one thing just about everyone in Congress agrees to, it's China. It's doing something on China. Yeah. So, that stays past the presidency. And that needs to, our decisions here need to go into law to be able to be effective, for the long term.
Yeah, otherwise I think we'll find ourselves in an even worse situation. Let's say the White House switches to the other side of the aisle. I mean, they're going to run on unwinding a lot of the things that Trump did because he is, by definition, their enemy. So then we'd end up in this place where we're kind of dependent, but we're also kind of building infrastructure, and it just would be an absolute nightmare.
Right. And it doesn't take, even a cursory look at the media, and you see all these cyber attacks that China has hosted and all the penetrations that they've done inside thousands and thousands of U.S. critical infrastructure companies to know, look, this is ceased to be funny. I mean, we are very much on the losing end of a lot of different types of warfare mechanisms that China's been using against us.
How big is the size, scope, and scale of what they are deploying towards us? Like, well, can you describe what your best bet would be on the espionage operation against the U.S. from China?
Sure. So China uses what we call a whole of society approach, right? If you're in the CIA, you're recruiting a person, and that person provides information about some government, operation that you're interested in, some weapon system, blah, blah, blah. China provides an incentive system using the Chinese Communist Party to get people to go out and basically steal everything. So it's not just government secrets. That's the Ministry of State Security handles, the People's Liberation Army handles, in their Joint Staff Department, they or Joint Intelligence Bureau, they handle those specific components. But they're also state-owned enterprises. There are over 300,000 state-owned enterprises in China. So, and they're empowered, encouraged to go out and steal foreign technologies. There are individuals who come back with and actually go and brief a U.S. company, brief their technologies inside China and say, I got this from Google, Google's AI from working in Google. And, here's what we can do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and pull in investors inside China to do that. And the investors are sitting there looking at stolen technology. We've seen it numbers of times. So it's they provide a system that encourages that type of theft. So that leads to two things. Number one, it leads to espionage on a massive scale in the hundreds of thousands. I have a database alone in just what's become public. I have documented about 920 some odd number of cases of espionage or economic espionage. So, I mean, just, open what I've been able to document. So, I mean, it happens in the hundreds of thousands. We're not used to dealing with that. Our government structure is not set up to do that. So, the FBI, if they were dealing with this, if they didn't have all the immigration stuff and things landing on their lap and organized crime and drugs and everything else, they would be spending their entire time out working with companies to try and stop this, or universities to try and stop this. But they don't. It's a losing game. I mean, with all the arrests they've made and all the people that they've thrown in jail for this, it hasn't slowed it down a bit.
What could we do that would slow it down a bit? Because it sounds like you're almost fighting off a tsunami with a teaspoon.
Right. And that's what I'll in the FBI's own words, by the way, they had about 2 cases dealing with China per day. That's, yeah, once every 12 hours times 365, so 730 cases a year. And I've had this discussion with the FBI when they ask for help, and I say, no, because you guys you're wasting your time, and now you want to waste my time. It's 730 cases, and each one of those takes months to resolve. You're thousands of cases in arrear, over 56 field offices. This is the wrong way. Mm-hmm. The right way is to make it painful for China every time something like this happens. So they have a cyber attack. They conduct a cyber attack, as we saw recently, with numerous cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. Great. We're kicking all your companies off the U.S. stock exchange. All your state-owned enterprises where they get all their investments, they're gone. And we've talked to the Brits. They're not going to go on the London exchange or the Nikkei index as well. So starve them. No, you get no more capital from us for doing that type of theft. Well, you can prove. Now, we don't have to prove anything. We're a sovereign nation. But we've seen you doing this, and you're gone. I think you need to take an offensive with them. Everything they do, they need to feel pain. We take another approach. We build walls. We say, let's build cybersecurity. I mean, we created a whole industry for cybersecurity, right? A whole industry to protect our companies and our government. Now, who pays for that?
Taxpayers.
The Americans. Yeah, the taxpayer. If it's a government, the taxpayer's paying for it. If it's a company, the consumer's paying for it. And all to protect against China. I mean, primarily to protect against China. Okay, how about we take an offensive there? Oh, really? You want to cyber attack us? Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to impose tariffs on you for everything from 1, 2, 3. And if you do it again, we're going to give a carrier to Taiwan. We're going to let them deal with it. Or we're going to base carriers out of the Philippines or out of Taiwan. Let them understand there are consequences for their actions, because right now it's playing a basketball game where every time you get the ball, you turn around and give it back to your opponent. You're on defense all the time. So
what's the art? I mean, what would it take to get those in power in our government to take those actions? I really like the stock exchange one. I hadn't heard about that. Plus, you pair it with the other international markets, like,
right.
Let's just turn the faucet off on your cash. The carrier one, that would elicit a response for sure. But
yeah,
why don't, I mean, again, it's like the worst held secret ever that these things are happening. Why don't we do anything?
Because we have hundreds of people in the Congress and the administration, and everyone thinks they're in charge. If you ever talk to a congressional staffer, you'll get that opinion pretty quickly. Everyone thinks that they're driving the train. And, it's Congress should pass one law, and they should demand every administration provide a strategy for how they intend to deal with China, with goals, lines of effort, as we've had in the military, everything on how you're getting from A to B and what your metrics are for success. And you can have an unclassified, thing and with a classified component, and every administration should produce an update to that for the Congress every year. Because when I talk to senior officials or when I talk to members of Congress and say, what's your idea of what the U.S.-China relationship should be in 10 years? It's like a deer in the headlight. And I'm like, really? It's quite probably the most important relationship between nation states that we have in the last century. And you haven't figured this out yet? You don't have an idea of where you want us to be in 10, 15 years? More than anything, we need a strategy. We need to understand where we're going, why. And that doesn't mean putting China down. It means bringing it in to the world, where it obeys the law, where it's an acceptable, code of behavior.
It's interesting. People will ask, well, why isn't Congress doing anything? They should look at how much time they allocate in their day to just getting reelected, because the stats show it's 60 to 70%. So the people that we have elected to represent us spend a vast majority of their time just trying to figure out a way to stay into office, not actually do things like this. So it really shouldn't be a huge question mark for people why these things aren't being figured out.
Yeah. And then when you look at congressional staff, which are not experts in China, right? I mean, they're not experts in anything. They can't be, because they have, a congressman has to deal with farm issues, has to deal with labor issues, agricultural issues, labor issues, national security issues, and China, right? Unless you have Superman on your staff, these people are what they do, what they wind up doing is they wind up coming to someone like me that they trust and say, Nick, can you write a speech for the congressman on this and dealing with China? And I write up a speech, and in the old days, I fax it over and or email it over. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And that would be and that's what they do, because they have so that becomes a difficult thing. You have then companies pushing for no, if you do that, we'll lose 100 million our business in China. And you have experts like me saying, hey, this is a reality of what's happening. So it becomes a cluster.
Yeah. As technology is increasing, are you seeing, is China still heavily using human as well as they're using electronic means? Are they still focusing on human beings in the U.S., whether it's in colleges, whether it's, they're tasked with finding IP in companies? Is it still an equal balance? Or are they leveraging technology more?
Actually, let's say they're doing both, but they're also leveraging technology to enhance their human.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So the fact that the Brits say that they had 20,000 approaches from the MSS on LinkedIn, the French had 9,000, the Germans had 10,000, and they identified hundreds of cases where people passed them information. on LinkedIn. Oh, start with this paper and stuff. So they leverage technology. You leverage software, marketing software, which LinkedIn provides available. If you would look me up on that software, you'd see all my circle of friends, contacts, people that I'm closer to, people that, that are further. So they're leveraging technology to enhance their targeting in particular capabilities, as well as obviously the encryption for COVCOM, for covert communications. But that said, the human effort is pretty aggressive. And we just saw that recently in the case of Chen Yuanzi.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up, I wanted to read, and for the audience, I have kind of a debrief of kind of what just happened involving the U.S. Navy, and I'm sure you know about this as well. Before that, though, should I feel left out and not respected or valued by the Chinese? Because I have yet to be hit up on LinkedIn. Like, I'm on there too. Why nobody's hitting me up? Should I feel bad about this? I also, for clarity, have absolutely no information to provide either, so that's probably why.
I think that's a personal issue you're going to deal with.
Why are you guys leaving me out? I feel special.
You know what? You know what they frequently do for SOF operators? I've seen them going after schools and people who have left the community.
Oh, and they have their own school, like they focus on a level of teaching a certain thing, you mean?
Well, no, they go to our schools. They'll send someone through our schools. And then, like in the case of one guy who I wrote about in my latest book, in the case of him, he went to several SOF schools after the fact, Ronin and a few other places, and got trained in CCP, got trained in close quarter battle, and fully trained. And then the next thing I see on his Chinese social media popping up of him training the Chinese special forces, Chinese police services, their Chintu, their fist units and things like that. So he went through 2 years of training on our schools by guys who had left the service and then turned around and went back to China, and he's running the show on training tons of people. So
Great.
Yeah, I know. It's us.
All right, so I'm gonna read this for the audience. I'm curious because this kind of ties in, even though I'm sure there's an aspect of SIGINT in this as well, but it seems human based. 2 Chinese nationals, and you probably can say these names better. Was it Wans Chen and Li Ren Ray Ryan Lai? Are you familiar with this case?
I am.
All right, were arrested in late June 2025. So we're talking a month ago, and charged with acting as illegal agents of China's Ministry of State Security, or the MSS, inside the United States. According to federal prosecutors, the pair carried out a covert influence and recruitment operation aimed at infiltrating the U.S. military. Chen, a lawful U.S. permanent resident living in Oregon, and Lai, who entered via a tourist visa, allegedly worked together to identify and assess potential Navy personnel, especially those of Chinese descent, for recruitment. Prosecutors say Chen photographed naval bases and recruitment centers, including locations in California and Washington state, and transmitted the images to Lai, who was in communication with Chinese intelligence officers. In one incident, Chen's wife allegedly delivered a $10,000 cash payment in a backpack during a dead drop at a Bay Area recreational site, money reportedly tied to the MSS. Chen is also accused of traveling to China in 2024 and 2025 to meet with MSS agents and receive instructions and compensation. Both men face charges of operating as unregistered foreign agents, which carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison and $250,000 fine. U.S. officials have characterized this case as part of a broader and increasingly aggressive campaign by Chinese government to infiltrate U.S. institutions, particularly the military. This is a month ago, so this falls in line exactly with what we're talking about. What do you make of this? Is this kind of like just the template that they are playing forward on this? Do you assume that this is probably going on at other military installations across Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, those type of things?
Oh yeah, well I can tell you it is, most definitely. I mean, this is one of half a dozen cases, similar cases that we've seen over the course of the last 3-4 years. Right, we've had a number of other cases. A kid by the name of Schultz, Sergeant Schultz, was sentenced for espionage. A few other ones, Patrick Way in San Diego, Thomas Zhao, also in San Diego, both within the Navy, both in the Navy, both arrested and sentenced, both working for Chinese. Actually, Way is I think still undergoing his
So is that
case.
an information transfer mostly? Are they looking for sensitive type of information, or are they actually trying to recruit people? I mean, it would be tough. You know this, I know this. Like you say you recruit a guy on a ship. I mean, that person is going to have limited ability to have outcome on the ship itself, but they certainly may have access to information. So is this more targeted towards information, or are they actually trying to over time develop, and again, this is a stretch for me, influence and the ability to impact the US
Well,
war machine in some way?
those are two different types of approaches. The
Yeah.
influence approach is on a completely different track ways. But if you want to talk about just the information, so what they do is they think long term, right? So they grow these kids basically in their early 20s, get them into providing technical manuals and pictures on the ship, and pictures of equipment, things,
Mhm.
op orders that they have for exercises that are going on in the Pacific. All those types of things that they ask for those young sailors who they have access to provide to. In the case of Chen, um, I actually found a couple of errors in the FBI's criminal complaint. Not the least, it's ridiculous, but the person that they identified as his wife, they identify, which I looked up Wenting Chen Wenting, is in China, you put the last name first, right? So it's Chen Yuansi is the bad guy here. So his wife is identified as, they co-own the house, or rather she owns the house. They have businesses together, all in Washington State. She's the one who actually did the work. The dead drop was done at Grenada Bowling Alley in Livermore, California, right? And there's photos of her that they have going down. They happen to post a Google review of it, which is like ridiculously insane, because you could just look up the Google review and see where they were. So a lot of errors in that criminal complaint, but you did be able to were able to expand out the network, and what they were doing was targeting two Navy sailors, and one of which who invited them on the Abraham Lincoln, on the USS Abraham Lincoln, and that's where they took the video and took pictures and went around. And this is a kid. We have no belief that he was recruited yet, but of course they've made friends. They took a trip together. He, brought them on the Lincoln on a public tour day, that type of thing. And
Mhm.
then ultimately the idea is to put cash in his hands and to bring him over into a point where he's being paid. Once that happens, you're stuck.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's very, very difficult to go back after you've been on a payroll for tens of thousands of dollars and say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. Well, you sort of have to at that point. So they'll take a sailor young like that and grow them in for the next 10 years to where they get access to classified data. In the case of Patrick Way, they were congratulating him, encouraging him, and congratulating him on getting his citizenship while he was in the Navy, understanding that he would get access to more classified information that way. So long-term thinking with these guys,
Yeah.
short-term issues, using things like COVCOM, which involve technology, in this case using computer systems that they actually came by to service and to work on, and then using WeChat, their encrypted communication system, that they have, their encrypted app that they
Mhm.
use for communication. So a lot of different things we saw methodology. We've only seen the use of a dead drop one other time in Chinese operations in the United States.
Really?
So yeah, one other time we've actually seen a dead drop. Um, so they're advancing. They're doing dead drops now. They're doing using computer-based encrypted communications in addition to things like WeChat. So they're making far more use of co-optees, so their case officers are not put in any jeopardy, right? So they have people who are basically throwaways.
Yeah,
But
cutouts.
yeah, they're using cutouts for it. So an evolution of Chinese tradecraft we've seen, particularly with this case, training involved. They're going back and they're training people in what to look for things. You see some explicit instructions of what to look for in dead drop zones, to look for surveillance cameras, pick an area that is outside of view of cameras, those types of things, which they didn't, but they were instructed to. Targeting individuals, what to look for in an individual. And you can see on the first person that they targeted, they did some background research on him. The fact that his parents had split up, he'd been alone with his mother since he was 8 years old. She couldn't handle him, all those types of things. So they actually did a fair amount of research into the individual as they're setting him up for targeting. And we've seen that again in a number of other cases where they're working towards building interpersonal relations with a prospective target for recruitment.
It's a long-term strategy for sure. I mean, how much money generally is passing hands in something like this? I mean, $10,000 is not a small sum of money. I'm almost 50 at this point. Of course, $10,000 sounds enticing, but when I'm 18, I'm like, well, this is the most money anybody's ever had in their entire life. Is it? I mean, and in the movies, right? It's the duffel bag full of $8 million, which I don't know if most people have seen a large sum of money like that. It doesn't fit in a duffel bag. You know, it'd also be very difficult to carry. The attaché case with 15 million. And I'm like, come on, guys, do a little bit of research here, just on like, you can find this on the internet. It's, you know,
Right.
it seems like relatively, again, and this is going to depend on where you're at in your life, relatively small sums of money.
Well, you pointed it out. When you're a kid in their 20s, which is what that they've been particularly in the military, what they've been focusing on, 15,000 happens to be a fair amount of money.
Yeah, never working again for the rest of my life.
Right. The sergeant in the Army, Corbin Schultz, he was paid a total of over 40,000, had an obsession with cars. So they tried to cover those payments in saying it was for car services. Some of that money is passed through everything from PayPal to Bitcoin to other digital forms of moving money. But it generally is, they'll go 10 or 15,000, but then it's a couple of thousand for each individual product that they provide.
Yeah.
And more often than not, when you're dealing with kids especially, they're just taking stuff off the internet if they don't have access to it and trying to make it up. And of course, China checks this stuff and says, hey, we found that on the internet, so we're not going to pay you. We're only going to give you $1,000, that type of thing. So it's a bit of a cat and mouse as they're trying to fleece the Chinese government, and the Chinese government is trying to make this person into a productive intelligence asset.
Yeah, 10 years down the road, the access you'll have, depending on what your job is, but yeah, the military is not designed to deeply share, sensitive things with the guy who's been in for a year. 10 years down the road, you might be supervising a department that's, might be in a skiff,
Right.
What I've heard a talking point, and I have no idea if this is true, and I'm hoping that you would know, that there is an effort for China to buy land around military installations. Have you heard people talking about this? Is there any legitimacy to that?
In fact, I have a list of all the land that they purchased in the United States and how many acres and where they are.
Why would we allow that? I mean, it's just like, come on, guys.
I got to tell you that China's main focus on this is not, they own Smithfield Ham, right? Yeah. So they own the largest pork distributor in the world. They own. So all those farms and all that, those facilities and slaughterhouses and stuff, they own. So it's not for them. Look, they buy farmland. Well, guess what? Where the hell do we put military bases but way out in the middle of nowhere, right? So
unless you're in the Navy, oceanfront property, baby.
Right. So, so not a surprise there. Espionage, while they certainly can conduct it, and there are a couple of key things that they benefit for in being in a proximity near a military base. If you're in the downlink of a satellite going down to a military base, if you're in that immediate area, you're certainly going to catch the downlink, which you normally wouldn't. If it's long wave radio that they're communicating out to ships or something like that, and if you're in that wavelength that's being transmitted and received, you're going to be able to capture those emanations as well. This physical observation of a base, but the real point of this whole thing has less to do with espionage than it has to do with China's feeding its population. China only has 15% arable land. And when you're talking about a population of over 1 billion people, they have to import, period. They have to. If they're not importing food, they're starving. 70% of the world's seafood is consumed in Asia. Okay, over the entire planet, 70% is consumed, and the vast majority of that is the rising middle class in China, which is why China is claiming ownership of the South China Sea. It's got nothing to do with their ownership. There are two things the South China Sea has. It has food, which it needs for its population, and it has oil and gas reserves, natural gas and oil reserves. And if you build one nuclear plant a week in China for the next 20 years, you still won't meet their energy needs, assuming their growth as it's going now. So it's a desperate need for farmland, arable farmland to grow and to ship back to China, right? We don't want to be hostage to the U.S., so we'll put our own companies there and let our own companies grow, and our own companies will ship back, right? That way we don't play with the U.S. That's the plan from their
Spoken
part.
hub model, yeah.
Yeah, just the fact that it's in proximity to a military base and there might be some benefit of that, great. I'm sure they're thrilled about it. But at a higher level, it's feeding their population and the economy. It's actually driving their military to claim control of the South China Sea. It's the resources that they need.
Well, I'm sure they're fishing it in a highly regulated way. So, I mean, I'm sure it's going to be great. What are your thoughts on one of the things I've heard about China is, they're going to be less of a threat in the future because their population is actually about to swing in the other direction. Their one-child policy, their birth rate. How much weight do you put into that? Is there legitimacy to that? I mean, the math, is kind of the math in that respect, but I'm just curious your thoughts.
Well, the math is correct. As of 2022, they started a downtrend, and now India is the largest country in the world, not China, by way of population. And that will continue to accelerate, if anything. So, China's trying everything, and it's just not working.
Yeah. Well, that's not an overnight solution. I mean, that's like generations of the one child policy. I'm like, ooh, that math doesn't math well.
Right. It's another, many of these factors are interlocking, right? So when we have the U.S. putting tariffs on it and they're not exporting, well, that has an effect on the economy, and that has effect on young people's lives where they have a somewhere between 20 and 25% unemployment rate in college educated youth. Guess what? It has an effect on your birth rate. People don't want to get married. People don't want to, under those circumstances. So it delays for years any ability to raise the population, to raise the birth rate. And then people get older and, birth rates go down naturally as a result of that. So all these economic factors are interlinked with what happens on the birth rate. Whether it has any effect on the threat, that's a long shot. That's, people spend, I could make an argument for either case. It gives more of a threat, or it's less of a threat. I don't think there's any good data to work with on that.
Yeah. You could see them figuring out a way through it, or it could push them to a point where they do something very rash. Yeah, I agree. I think you could make an argument for either side of that. Last question for you today, to be respectful of your time. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is at a high level, geopolitical level. We're talking about congressmen. We're talking about administrations. And honestly, I think most of the audience of the show are not those people. And I think it's really reasonable for people to ask themselves, well, okay, yeah, that sounds great. I get that there's a threat there, but you're talking about people who are breathing an air that I don't breathe, that I don't get consulted on those decisions. So what actually can I do as a person? And what advice would you give other than maybe don't buy the refrigerator that has designed around electronics because you can see inside of it with your app? What would you say to the average person who thinks that what we're talking about today is, a little bit above their pay grade?
So, yeah, I get it. The not buy China is a nice thought, not completely feasible.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah, in this day and age. So there are a couple of things that I think about. Number one is that we have an effort now pushing towards the states and even local communities to be aware of, these types of actions from China, because they are blissfully unaware. And as I've talked to members of Congress, they said, if someone stood up in one of my meetings and, one of my town halls and said, what are you doing about the China threat? I would be stunned. And it would have a huge impact actually on me, that it's gotten down to the constituents so much that they see it and understand it as a threat and are now turning around asking me. So, as cliche as it sounds, just it takes you 5 minutes. Find out your congressman, go online and say, hey, I hear all this about the China threat and I'm actually really concerned. What are you doing about the farmland issue? What are you doing about the issue of them stealing our intellectual property? $600 billion a year in IP.
Yeah.
Right? Estimates are up to $600 billion. So, it's just that simple. It's that simple even in town halls, even in your state representatives. because what we find is that there's a lot more power to work on a state by state level than there is sometimes in the federal government. So, it is talking to your politicians. It is talking to those who are supposed to be governing you, even at your most local levels, about, what do we do about issues of China and land sales and theft of technology and economic control of the U.S.?
Yeah.
Is there anything that we have and you'll find Hershey, Pennsylvania. It doesn't matter where you are. You'll find out that there's a Chinese influence effort in that area, and the politicians need to be made a little aware of it. They need to hear more from the people to be able to say, oh, okay, I really need to address this threat. This needs to go on the agenda, after salting the roads, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's fair. Well, Nick, I can't thank you enough for your time and the expertise. It was certainly enlightening for me, and I think it will be for the listeners as well.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to learn more about Nick's work, check out his most recent book, Chinese Espionage, Operations, and Tactics. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, brought to you by Firecracker Farm. See you all next week with a new episode and a new guest.